Today we're going to discuss a very important topic, the Civil Rights Act. This act defends the rights of all Americans. Before we discuss the Civil Rights Act, I'd like to help you understand what it was like in America for African Americans before this act was passed. Racial equality was a non-existent factor in the U.S. Northern and southern states dealt with racial segregation differently. In the northern states, such as New York, they had cities inside of cities set up for non-white ethnicities, such as Harlem and the Bronx. This was used in most of the major cities. It was a type of segregation that didn't need to be enforced. The southern states had something called Jim Crow laws. These laws forcibly segregated the white and black people. They were not to use the same bathrooms, fountains, pools, schools, theaters as white people. In the South, people of color were beaten and killed for doing things that were viewed as disrespectful. This violence was used to keep African Americans afraid. This fear kept them from standing up for their rights or themselves until the Civil Rights Movement. Now that you understand what it was like before the Civil Rights Act, let's talk about how John F. Kennedy helped with the Civil Rights Movement. When JFK was elected president in 1960, the Civil Rights Movement had already been going on in the South for 6 years. When JFK took office, he didn't want to get involved with the Civil Rights Movement. The reason was he needed the white voters from the South to be reelected. But as his presidential term progressed, the civil rights activists were being assaulted and even killed for standing up for their rights in the South. The continued acts of violence against the protesters and calls for JFK to do something finally boiled over in 1960. The tipping point came when Martin Luther King had led a nonviolent protest in Alabama, and the police responded by using fire hoses, dogs, clubs, and tear gas to punish the protesters for protesting. JFK's hand was forced, and he finally began to act. This was the birth of the Civil Rights Act. This act would end segregation in public places and ban employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. After putting the Civil Rights Act together and submitting it to Congress, JFK was assassinated in Dallas. His successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, took up the fight and got the Civil Rights Act passed 8 months later. The legacy of John F. Kennedy is a long and very important one in U.S. history. The Civil Rights Act is just one part of his legacy, but it's a very important piece of the larger whole. Now you may be wondering, why is this act so important, and how does it affect us today? I'll tell you, this act is important because it gives all people in the United States the right to vote, to exist without prejudice, and to be who they are without discrimination. Without this act, we wouldn't be able to pursue true happiness and freedom, which is what America is founded on. Now it's your turn. I want you to group up and pick leaders from the civil rights movement, such as Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, and explain their roles and why they are important to this movement.